So thanks for joining. Welcome to the webinar for swarmOS, Get Your Atlassian Jira to your business users, best practices and tools. So what we want to talk about today is how to reach out to your business community and get your Jira application used by your business users as well. We all know that Atlassian, especially Jira, is very much used in modern software development, and a lot of software developers and development departments are using Jira to actually run the whole software development and steering their projects and so on and so forth. But how do we get this to the business users, and how do we integrate them into the project from their perspective, and what is needed to succeed? First of all, the obvious safe harbor statement. We want to outline the general direction, including product direction. If you intend to buy, please use our website and get the latest and final information. If we look into business project as such, we have the situation that according to different studies, here are quite some studies from version 1, that business projects fail. We do know that roughly 50% of the business projects do not deliver the original proposed business value. If you look into very large business projects, the quote is even, or the ratio is even worse. We have 38% are completely failing, 10% are called a total success, and 50% are roughly challenged. We have projects overrunning, get implemented later, or not implemented at all. So obviously, the business side of the business needs a different way of managing business projects. We have good methodologies in software development. We use agile approaches like Scrum or Kanban, and we would like to focus on how to get those very successful project management approaches over to the business side. First of all, why do we change? The world today is faster, it's more uncertain, it's more complex, and the speed of change has increased dramatically. That requires a different approach, and as mentioned, we would use the agile management approach. In particular, Scrum is something we would favor. So Scrum is about running the whole project execution in sprints. We normally use 2 weeks. We have the customer involved, we have reviews, we have small teams working in an agile fashion. But as well, the organizational principle changes. That means we are organized in teams. This is no surprise for people who work in Scrum and Agile. But this means a lot for management and business, that they actually have cross-functional teams. The hierarchy of management isn't relevant for the project execution, and you basically give the power to these cross-functional teams to deliver their work. So it's quite some change management involved. And finally, just to recap here, organizational enablement. So email and file share won't work any longer because it's not real-time information sharing. It will not suit the process of working in agile fashion. So we would need 3 things to succeed. We need an agile approach to manage projects. We need an organizational principle that empowers teams to work cross-functional, and we need tools to really give them access to real-time information and real-time collaboration. And this is what we want to cover. We will cover how to do this. We will use Atlassian Jira to do this, and we will do a live demo to show you how we can execute on this side for software as well as for business projects. Having said so, we all know the Atlassian toolset from the project management side. So we know Confluence, which is excellent for documentation and product requirements and sharing minutes. We have Service Desk, obviously, for support. We have HipChat to do real-time communication, which is now moved over to Stride. We have Jira for issue tracking, as well as for managing the scope of the project by having a backlog and so on and so forth. So nothing new. But if you look at these tools, the Atlassian platforms fit pretty much for the IT community, because you're used to it, you're focused on the next 2 weeks. A business user has significantly different requirements and requires a different user interface as well. Having said this, just to recap, we work on software projects with Scrum, using Jira, by defining the project goals and the scope. We do grooming. We create a large product backlog, which we prioritize. We then take, in agreement with the Scrum team and the Scrum Master, our sprint backlog, something we would like to achieve in the next 2 weeks. We have our dailies, and after 2 weeks, during the sprint review, we show to our customer what we actually released. In business, this is slightly different. We have obviously a product backlog. We have different deliverables, which are user stories as well. We can take something into the sprint backlog and work on this during the next 2 weeks. We have our dailies. That works fine in business as well. But the testing and the deliverable to customer may be different, because a business delivery could be a contract. It could be that you hire something, that you get a government permission to do business in a certain country, that you establish the supply chain. So obviously the outcome and the sprint review looks slightly different. And the other big difference you have is that you have more dependencies. So for example, if you want to launch a marketing campaign, your software team probably needs to be ready to have a software product ready to release. Your support team needs to be ready to provide multi-language support. So you have dependencies between projects from a business perspective, which you won't face if you run a single software project. So dependencies do matter. Having said this, what do we get from Atlassian to help our business community to run projects throughout the company and collaborate with the software projects at the same time? We would get this wonderful project backlog. We use Atlassian on our own to develop our software. We use Scrum methodology. We have remote teams to work on. You can see there are a lot of user stories in the sprint, which we call Spring Joy. That works actually fine for this particular project. If you're a business user and look at this backlog, you would be probably lost because you won't spot any dependencies. It's very hard to find out if you miss something out, if something needs to come first and block something away. So all of this isn't easy to read from this product backlog. You get your Scrum Board, obviously, which is pretty much focused not on the big picture, but on what needs to happen within the next 2 weeks, which is excellent. So for business teams as well as for software teams or cross-functional teams, it's a super good Scrum Board. Everybody knows what to do in the next 2 weeks. Work get distributed. Users get assigned their stories. That's perfectly fine. But this is very much focused on short term. Business projects like launching a product to market normally would have a certain end date. You can compare this with our version release date, which we know in Scrum as well, but they may have dependencies. So they need to solve a couple of things, and going to market is super important. It may do some public relationship to the outside. So having a certain date to deliver is much more in focus than it is on developing software, because you would probably move things into a sprint and out of a sprint, while they are pretty much target on the time box like a version. We do have version support in Atlassian Jira, as we know, so we can see how much is still to do on this single version, what is in progress and how is our progress. That's pretty nice. Again, if you look at these 3 screens, a management team, a business user would probably think, well, this is rather complex. I don't get the real thing. So what is the requirement a normal business user would have? And we have experiences in a lot of different business projects in the past. They want an easy way of reading a project. So what is the scope of the project? Hard to get from a long list of backlog, right? What is the timeline? Do I match actually my go-to-market date at some point in time? Do I have my supply chain ready by the end of the year? Do I have a budget, and do I stay in budget, which may be important for my business case? What challenges do I face? Does my team need any help? Yeah, so where are the blockages during the Scrum process? Is there an escalation from your Scrum team which you can actually resolve by management? This is nothing which is built into Jira today. Satisfaction. So is my team satisfied with the progress? Is my internal or external customer satisfied with the outcome of the sprint reviews? Nothing you would get straight away from Jira today. So the bigger picture a business user requires on their projects is very hard to get, or on plain Jira, you won't get it at all. The second thing a business user would like to see is to get an overview across multiple projects. You can obviously look into Jira and check project by project, but actually they want to know if the software development gets ready with a product and the service desk is ready with their service desk in multi-language capabilities, while the marketing campaign is ready to launch. So how do things come together? These are 3 different projects, or 4 potentially, and you have dependencies across all of those projects. Jira is very hardly able to display dependencies across projects. Same for teams. You may have some people, which is not ideal, to work on different projects at the same time because they have super critical skills. How do you figure that out? Every project deals with capacity on its own and do sprint planning, but how do you actually figure out that somebody is needed in different projects at the same time and will not be fully available? So taking decisions from this overview is crucially important to those business users. And they actually want to see these dependencies which are business relevant. Nothing Jira would get you. We want to guide you through the way of setting up Jira this way and using add-ons to actually make this work, that the business users feel totally comfortable working on the same tool set as our software teams and actually managing their business projects to success. So what are the key success factors a typical business user and any project manager or product owner would look at? First of all, your project is driven by the project scope. In software, we potentially call this a minimal viable product. We prioritize our backlog and say this is a must-have. The rest is probably nice to have or won't do. But this is determining the scope and the volume of the work you need to do, which you can see over here. With all the project requirements, you create your backlog, you sort and prioritize your backlog, and you actually define the scope of your project. If scope gets added, that has an impact. If scope is dropped, that has an impact as well. Then you have basically a pipeline, which is your teams working on all of those project requirements, which you have prioritized in your backlog during the sprints. And they may face blockages. So this pipeline, the amount of work, the velocity the teams do have, are limited by blockages which need to be removed by management. So how do I escalate those blockages fast that management actually can take action immediately and solve problems so that your teams have full capacity, full velocity to deliver your project if they're time critical? Your capacity is the other thing. We describe the team's velocity in the ability of a team to deliver work, which improves over time if they get better and better. You can actually say, this is my velocity per sprint, per day. But if I work against the timeline, what is my total capacity if I have 5 teams working, if I have so much velocity per sprint? What is actually the total capacity I do have to match the scope of my project? And this determines the time you need if your teams work in full speed to produce a certain project outcome. So timeline is determined by the blockages, the capacity, and the scope. Same for cost. If you have 5 teams running for the next 6 sprints, you can determine the cost immediately because you have a pretty good idea what this will cost to run the project. Motivation is a early indicator of how a project actually goes. If you have all the skills in hand you need, if you are removing blockages by management, if you get full management support to work agile or not. So, serving the customer as well as your teams after every sprint is a key factor to success, because you would get an early indicator. So you have certain drivers like change of scope, your velocity, and the blockages which impact your timeline, your cost, and the motivation of your teams, and they have different degrees of impact. So you can see this from the matrix down below. So these are the things we really focus on. These are the things which really matter to have a successful project. As a manager, I would most likely look at it from a team perspective. As we do in Scrum, we work with cross-functional teams. We assign work to users which are part of a team. Nevertheless, Jira does not have team management with velocity out of the box. It requires some work to get an understanding of, what is your team's velocity. You can look at sprint reports on and so forth, but there's nothing I can look at and say, I'm good on what I try to achieve, or I'm probably short on resources for my whole project. So these are things a business user or a manager would probably look at to succeed with their projects. To give you a short perspective on how we actually deal with this from a best practice perspective, so we created an add-on which is free for the cloud, which is called swarmOS Foundation, which gives you a lot of additional functionality. And one important functionality is team management, including the ability to assign a cost rate to a team and velocity. The velocity is obviously calculated automatically if you close a sprint and the team has delivered, for example, 600 points and you had a 10-day sprint, the daily velocity was 60. You can obviously overrule this velocity by setting any other velocity because you added a team member, which should normally not happen, or you add a complete new team to the project, which then changes your total capacity to deliver against your project scope. So we do manage teams with members, roles, permissions, as well as cost rates per teams and their velocity per project. And you will see this later on during the demonstration. The second thing we add is what we call swarmOS Cockpit. And Cockpit automatically creates a scorecard per project. Obviously, everything which is red is something your top management, your product owner needs to focus on. And we have different measurements, which I explained to you, but you basically get all of your agile projects in one single view in Jira. So it's a Jira add-on, which fetches all the values from your projects and displays the right metrics to succeed, as we have discussed before. You can actually look at different parameters. There is a lot of online help, which I show you later on. By hovering over the different icons, you will get contextual help. So you would get the red button on the top for the project, which is the escalations. You would see if there are versions or milestones missed you have put on your projects. You would see if you have significant change in scope. So somebody added scope to your project or the team dropped scope. You would see if your cost estimate is doing well and the capacity of your teams is actually good enough to handle your backlog towards a certain release date. And what is your team mood and your customer satisfaction? So you get all of these critical success factors, which we have talked about before. You can switch to list view, which allows you to see which projects, for example, are short on capacity, which is the column over here. You can see one red projects. You can obviously drag and drop those projects. But actually, if you say, well, project X is red on capacity, actually, it's not my most important project, or I have another project which I intend to drop and I have a good team on this project, which actually has the capability to work on project X. You can actually see this from here and say, okay, let me drop a project here or reduce capacity and actually put more capacity on project X, which then allows me to actually meet my deadline. You can see that you have a red flag here for two versions milestones you have promised to your customer which haven't been succeeded, and there's a big change of scope as well. So a good comprehensive overview on your projects, which allows you to actually take trade-off decisions, get early indicators which projects are green, which are not doing as well, and what are the key problems. Having said this, diving one level deeper, you get all of those information at your fingertips. And we will see this on the live demo later on. You would get all of the user stories escalated in one list. Obviously, the red ones are the super critical ones. You can click on it, you're straight in Jira, you can comment, you can make a decision, and you can help the team to resolve things immediately. All of those information are real-time information. You would see your team's capacity and the real-time backlog. It's very hard to figure out what your backlog is in Jira. You know your sprint very well, but if you look at the whole backlog and how much work is in the versions you have agreed to deliver, that's very hard to spot. It's very easy here because you have a version selector up here and you can actually see real-time backlog at any time, matching with your team's capacity. As promised, we would measure sprint by sprint the cost which have been occurred up to now and the cost which are estimated to complete the project for the project timeline or release date of a certain sprint. You would see all of the milestones or versions which have been achieved, which have been failed to achieve on time. You would see change of scopes. There's nothing here, but there is a very good deep dive which we can show in the demonstration in a minute. So swarmOS Cockpit is another add-on which provides you per project very good information. Obviously, all of the project description, the escalation, the changes of scope, the people cost, any project settings such as budgets. You can chat immediately with the product owner and the customer. You can look at critical chains, something which we discuss later on during this webcast. And you can obviously filter down by version. You would see your capacity against your real-time backlog, any milestones or versions. So this is very handy and business user-like, easy to understand, easy to use, to immediately spot any actions you need to take. Going into our real-time demo, we have provided you with a cloud Jira instance here for demonstration purposes. By the way, all of the tools are available on server and cloud. It looks pretty similar, no matter if you use cloud or server. So we have this wonderful backlog. We have our usual sprint boards. And actually, we can look at, as promised, to team management. We have set up teams for this wonderful project. And you can see that we have a couple of teams over here with different daily velocity and points, daily cost rates, team members are set. So it's easy to handle. It's easy to configure. You can just go over and create teams. You can give them another icon, an avatar, and so on and so forth. So that's super easy to handle and quite fast to adapt. It's very intuitive. You can, as said, assign members which are fetched from your directory. So I could, for example, search for one of my Alexanders. They are a team member. I add them. All of the roles and permissions are set. I do update, and I have a new team member on my team, which will be surveyed at the end of a sprint. I can look at my velocity, and I get a burn down report in principle by sprint. So I can see how much a team daily achieved by sprint. By closing the sprint, automatically the closed points will be calculated. I can update my cost rates. So very handy to manage team velocity and as well the cost rates. As promised, I have all of my projects, agile projects, in one overview on Cockpit. I can sort them and drop them as I like based on my priorities. I can obviously look at certain projects and see what's happening. I can see that obviously some things not okay here because I have a couple of red flags. And as promised, by hovering over, you see the text, what is behind every one of those icons and KPIs. This is about escalations. The next one is about any version which is missed, the changes of scope. This is the capacity chart, the cost chart, as well as the team mood. So every project gives you the key information like the project description, like the product owner. You can chat immediately. We have a NIP chat integration and we'll do Stride at some point in time. You can open up the next level, which gives you a detailed view on your project. And the project detail view gives you pretty much the exact same thing here. You have the customer over here with a chat integration, your product owner. You would see the escalations which have been raised. We have an escalation workflow. So if your team has escalated the story to a red, for example, there are different escalation levels. This will be immediately shown to the leadership dashboard, and everybody knows on the management team there is action to be taken over here, and you can comment straight away. Jira is only one click away. The Jira issue itself is only one click away. We can do the same for budget escalation. If something gets significantly more important or more expensive, you can do this as well. Backlog versus capacity. As promised, we fetch the real-time backlog of all your evaluated user stories. At any point in time, we do this per sprint and freeze it at the end of the sprint closing. For the current sprint, we always fetch the one which is real-time. We have the team's capacity. So the sum of your team's capacity is 598 points. You have 809 points in backlog to be delivered by those teams towards the project date. And obviously your capacity is not fitting your backlog, and you obviously have more work to do than your team have in velocity and capacity, so it turns red. If you have enough capacity, that's fine. You can actually drill down by your teams and look at the different teams, and you see immediately, oh my God, there's one team, which is my software team 2, which has so much work and so little capacity they won't succeed on the work they have. If I looked at my softy team 1, they actually have not too much to do, but enough capacity to deliver. And then the other team is pretty much in good mode. They have a 70% utilization of what they want to achieve towards a certain version. I can always select this down by version as well. So if I look at my whole project and I see if I'm looking into my spring release version 3 only, everything up to there, it looks a little better, but it's still stretched. So I need to add capacity, or I need to drop some of my business context. Having said this, we have added one more feature, which is a time logged. So you can see as well, if you use time logging on Jira issues, how much a team has logged during a sprint in hours. You can obviously look this by team and can see how much hours have been recorded by team. It's very handy, hover over information. So that may be quite important to you as well. One other key success factor was a change of scope. So either teams or product owners have dropped scope, so minus 14 points, for example, and it says that this particular user story was dropped from 24 to 10. If you put it to won't do, it will be completely dropped and will be shown here. If you added scope, like probably this user story gets far more complex, it was increased from 10 to 22. So you would see the most important changes in scope over here. You can obviously look at your versions. All the ones which are completed are good to go are green. The ones which are due in a couple of days are yellow, and the ones which have been missed are red. Again, Jira is just one click away. You would immediately go over to Jira and see what actually happens on your standard Jira functionality to see this. As well as the results from your satisfaction survey. We do survey every team after every sprint. You can choose 10 questions. You can send the same survey to customers, and you can actually get a satisfaction score from 1 to 10 after the closing of every sprint. If enough team members, more than 3, answer the survey, you get the mood of your teams. And actually, this team feels pretty happy with a score of 8.3 out of 10. The team obviously had quite some good confidence to deliver the project. So you can see from here that you actually get your project information in terms of what has been escalated, what is a version missed potentially, is there a big change in scope, is the capacity doing fine on my project, do I need to change teams or add members, do I do okay in cost management, do I feel okay from a customer perspective as well as from a team's perspective. So it's very easy to work on this, and you obviously get the same as I said before in list view to compare your projects, and then you can see, okay, my software project, my most important project, let me put this to the top and potentially move some capacity from this project over here so that my timeline I've proposed to my customer is doing fine. So you can see it's very easy to work on this, and it's very business user-like, which is quite important. Business users want to see things at one place, want to make project decisions easy, want to get a good overview and a good confidence level. You would actually waive all of your executive status presentation because it's such easy. Every executive can look at the same view and everything is fetched from your system in real time. Having said this, as said, we think that business users need an easy way of reading a project, not looking at backlogs and Scrum boards, but actually get the big picture and then look and work with the Scrum board later on and to understand the scope, to understand the timeline, if you're doing fine on budget, if you have any blockages, and if everybody is happy with the project success so far. So we can cope with this from the swarmOS add-ons and Cockpit as well as Foundation. You get team management. You're actually able to view cross projects, and you're being able to make trade-off decisions, which is quite important. So how do I now spot dependencies between projects, which isn't easy, and we have another tool, another Jira add-on developed to do so, which actually allows you to do a couple of things. First of all, you can see people utilization across projects. So how many story points are assigned to a certain team member, and do they actually work on another project in parallel, which isn't ideal, but it's happening? Do I potentially have a critical resource which limits my success? Can I see Jira issues which are depending on other Jira issues? Looking at the long backlog, we have looked at it before, you won't spot any significant dependencies. But if you run business projects, for example, your product readiness is blocked by your supportability. Supportability consists out of the service desk portal, which needs to be available, is blocked by a multi-language setup. The multi-language setup at this point in time is blocked by the text translation for different languages. You have all of those user stories in your backlog, in different projects potentially, or in the same project, but you won't see easily who is blocking what need to be resolved to actually get your product readiness done. And this is what we want to focus on with swarmOS Analyzer to really get you this visibility. Same for dependencies across project. So if your marketing locked is blocked by the product readiness we have talked about before, and you would spot this and you would see that potentially software development release is blocked by the support side. So all of this will be shown by Analyzer. Introducing you to Analyzer, and this is how it looks like. It's a pretty amazing graphical database and visualization. It's quite dynamic. You can use your JQL filters to display anything you want. You can display all of your projects at the same time. It looks quite interesting at this point in time, but I will explain it to you very quickly, and you can see immediately the value you gain out of this. You have a couple of business queries over here, which are predefined. And if you choose, for example, critical resources, you would actually get, let me go over to this, you actually get the resource view. And the resource view gives you a quite comprehensive view of all your users and the assigned business stories. And you would immediately see that this user, which is me, has 113 issues assigned over time, with 604 total story points, of which 184 are open. We take 6 story points a day. That would mean I have more than 30 days of work ahead of me. That's obviously critical. It's more than a sprint. It's too much. That's why I have a red ring here. I'm a critical resource. I'm potentially overloaded. I have other resources down here which have new user stories attached to them, and they may be good for taking over some of my work. So I can spot this. And the interesting bit here is that those user stories in the different colors are across all of my projects. So all of my Jira projects, not only one, will be displayed here. I can do selections on showing those Jira stories. Having said this, you would see a couple of things on the Analyzer user interface. You would see epics with their attached user stories over here. You would see red links. So every node is a Jira issue. Every link is a relationship between Jira issues, which may be a relationship from an epic to a story and the other way around, or a blocking link, which is red. So I block something away, like my product readiness is blocked from my multi-language service desk, which isn't ready. So I would see this immediately. That links over to text translation. That blocks my marketing launch, obviously. So I can see those. Red circles indicates that my users have escalated a user story and say, I need help. I have something which a team can solve on its own. So this is a red link. I would see a couple of other things, like the size of the bubble indicates the number of story points or the criticality you have. So large nodes would indicate a lot of work. Smaller nodes would indicate smaller user stories. Let me go over to the demo again to show you how Analyzer actually works. This is Analyzer. Real life, we have loaded all projects of the demo system at the same time. I can hover over, as promised. Every node is a Jira issue. If I hover over, I get all of the relevant information. This is a Jira story. I see the name of the Jira story, the short description. I see the assignee, the reporter. If there are story points, I would see those as well. If I have an epic, I would see this here. I would see the sum of all attached user story points at any point in time, and I can make choices from here. I can even show this not by issue type, but I can show this by project. So I would easily spot which user story and epic are belonging to different projects. You can see I can highlight this by just hovering over. Here's my software project. If I move back to status, I can, for example, show only the open ones by hovering over. I can see the closed ones. If I look into issue types, for example, I can look for all my bugs. So easy to find. There's an action menu. If I double click, again, you're always 2 clicks away from your Jira issue. If I double click, I'm straight back into Jira. As promised, I have a couple of business queries which allow me to see different stories and different things. One is, for example, the most critical chains, which is a concept you may be familiar with. We have talked about critical chains in the cockpit before, and it's actually one user story is blocking another user story, indicated by this red link here. And I can hover over these blocking chains. So one is blocking the next one and so on and so forth. So I would, for one project, for example, I can easily find my blocking chain. I can see if any of those user stories has been escalated. There's one which is escalated. And I can hover over to understand what the dependencies between those user stories are and do a better sprint planning by putting, obviously, the ones which need to be completed to succeed with the next user story into the next sprint. So that's a super important information. I can choose another business query, which is called the most impactful resources, which actually allows me to show my resources. As I've shown you before, we are loading all of the Jira information. I can see people with aggregated story points, the number of users. I can see if I color code this by project that, for example, Stefan is predominantly working on this project, which is my software project. And then I have Pascal over here, which has different color nodes. And I can see that she's working on a demo project, on a business project, and the software project at the same time. And so it's important to understand where those critical links are and how the utilization is across the board. I can obviously visualize all and everything. I can narrow down everything by, just showing me the blocking links. I can focus and reduce on those. I can, see this by status and see which are of the big stories which are blocking the others away are still open. I can focus on those. I can get this information. And actually, as promised, with a double click, I can immediately go over to the action menu and look at the single node and see what I need to do to understand the blockages which are over here. So this is all we would like to show you today. We actually gave you a business perspective in regards to getting team management introduced, helping your customer to see blockages, changes of scope, so the big view on your projects, and really analyze your projects across your whole company by finding critical resourcing, blocking chains, blocking issues. This makes Jira really business ready. It gives your executive team an information which projects are red, which projects have problems. It gives you the ability to integrate your business community into your Jira system. And it gives you the ability to escalate topics, to seek for management help. Something, if your team cannot solve it on the ground, your management team has a red flag on their cockpit and can act for you and support the team to execute upon. We hope you find this useful. We have a lot of thought leadership in free white papers, which you can download from swarmOS.com, thought leadership. Feel free to do so. We have a blog. Feel free to comment. If there are any further questions, we are happy to take further questions at the end of this webcast and webinar. Obviously, we have a couple of customers who do use Jira and the swarmOS add-ons to really run business projects and software projects. One is the Lowell Group from the financial industry, and they turned a whole set of projects into agile using Jira and those best practice we have just shown to you, including the software. And we are very keen on your feedback and hope you found this useful. And you find everything you want on our webpage, swarmOS.com. Our add-ons are listed for server as cloud on the Atlassian marketplace. You can try them for free. Just go to swarmOS.com. There's a link to the marketplace. Feel free to test. And please provide feedback. We are very keen on feedback. Happy to chat with you. Thank you so much for the webcast. And we would now open up for question and answers. You can see the team over here. Thank you so much and talk to you.